blanket.
Okay.
No, but he really put it's like warm where he has a light on.
Well, then bring the computer there.
We're live.
But he wakes up. He actually feels.
Okay, so we're live now, everyone. Today we're reading Paola, Santiago, and the River of Tears by Taylor K. Mejia. Chapter 25, Never Cage a Lechuza. Chapter 25 starts on page 275. Oh my, I thought I was sneeze. Sorry. Okay. Shoot. Okay. So chapter 25, Never Cage a Lechuza. Pao awoke feeling like her skull had been split in two. She couldn't open her eyes. They were too heavy. Dante? She called out. Before she thought better of it, no one replied. Bruto? Her voice came back to her like she was in a small space, muffled almost. She forced her eyes open then, and her stomach dropped as she took in her surroundings. She was in a glass cell. Dante was gone, so was Ondina. So was Ondina, and Bruto was nowhere to be seen. Hello? She called. Sitting up on the smooth glass floor, she looked for a door. There wasn't one. Pao's heart rate sped up like she'd just woken from a nightmare. It was a familiar feeling, but this time sleep had been escape. Her real life was a bad dream. She walked to the wall. She could cross the space in 4 steps. Help me, she shouted, pounding on the glass which swallowed the sound just like it had swallowed her blood. Frantic, Pao felt along every smooth, slick wall for a seam. Some kind of hidden panel that could slide open and get her out of here. But there was nothing. She might as well have been inside a snow globe. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her breathing coming shorter and sharper as she wandered about the amount of air in the space. Would she suffocate soon? They'd learn in science how much oxygen a human being used per minute, but she couldn't remember now. Help me, she screamed louder this time, banging on the seamless wall with both fists. Beneath her hand, the wall lit up with the pressure. No, Pao said, remembering her blood drop on the stair. The wall was feeding off her life force, and if her hypothesis was correct, the more worked up she got, the quicker it would drain her. She slid down to the floor and pulled her knees into her chest, trying to make herself smaller and to slow her pulse and her breathing. But tears slipped silently down her cheeks, and where they hit the glass beneath her, it glowed greedily. Pao didn't know how much time she spent sitting there. The light didn't change in her cell. It could have been an hour, a day, a week. The solstice had probably already ended. The Niños could all be gone by now, victims of the monsters from this place. Maybe she would never get out, and neither would Dante. Perhaps Pao's dreams about her friend's hand in the river had only been a fantasy, and Emma wasn't here after all. She had seemed so real, though, with her sandy hair and her purple nails. Don't give up on me, Emma had said, and Pao had promised she never would. Pao's desperate memories were interrupted by a red arch appearing in the wall in front of her. It disappeared almost as quickly as it had formed, leaving Ondina inside in the cell, the wall as impenetrable as ever. The possibility of a way out acted like a stimulant on Pao, and she felt her brain kick into gear, forming a plan almost without her permission. And it wasn't half bad either, if she did say so herself. First, Pao whimpered like someone had kicked her. Then she curled up tighter to appear weak and scared. Her eyes were open, only slits, and she hoped they looked closed. Get up, Ondina barked. It's time. She's waiting. Who's waiting? The effort of holding back the question almost ruptured something inside Pao. But there would be an opportunity to get an answer later if she did this right. She whimpered again. Ondina approached her, shoving her with a neat black boot. I said get up! There was no power in the kick, Pao noted. Did that mean Ondina didn't really want to hurt her? I can't, Pao answered, wheezing and coughing. This is just pathetic, Ondina said. And we don't have time for pathetic. Pao went still, though every muscle in her body screamed at her to get up and run. Wait, she told them, relaxing them one by one. Just a little longer. Ondina called her more names, but in the end she had no choice. She bent down and took Pao by the armpits, hauling her to her feet with surprising strength, given that they were almost the same height. If I ruin my hair hauling you around this place, you'll pay for it, Ondina muttered. But she slung an arm around Pow's and shouldered most of her weight, walking her toward the spot in the wall where the door had appeared. This time, Pow knew what to do. She had to be faster than the light. She closed her eyes. A dangerous move for a scientist, but Pow had learned a few things about faith since leaving home. She could feel in the air when Ondina decided to open the wall, and with the last bit of strength she had, Pow stood on her own 2 feet, shoved the other girl behind her into the cell, and threw herself through the doorway. Passing through the opening chilled her to the bone, and for a moment Pow worried that she'd miscalculated and the wall would claim her. Suck her dry until she was nothing more than a monster minion. At least when I'm an ahogada, I can kill Ondina without feeling bad about it, she thought. But then miraculously, she had made it, and she was still Pow, standing on the circular landing of the 2nd floor. There were only 2 ways to go: upstairs, deeper into the palace and the unknown, or downstairs toward the exit. Pow knew she had only seconds before Ondina righted herself and made another door, so she did what any stupid, brave hero would do. She forsook the passage back to the courtyard and took the stairs up, where she hoped she would find Dante. Paola! The shriek was so loud the glass chandelier rattled above her. But Pow didn't stop. She didn't answer either. She just kept running, 2 steps at a time, then 3, and whether it was her speed or her victorious feeling from tricking Ondina, the stairs didn't seem to want any of the energy she was putting out. Paola! Ondina was at the bottom of the stairs now, but Pow had almost reached the top. You have no idea what you're messing with, Ondina said, her footsteps too loud behind Pow. How can I find Dante? Pow wondered. I don't even know where he is. She pushed herself harder, but fear was creeping in, and the walls started to pulse with their hunger for it. At the top of the stairs was a long, high-ceilinged hallway full of cells with slotted glass doors, all glowing green. Pow barreled toward the first one, and it zapped her with an electric shock when she got too close. How would they manage to get glass to conduct electricity? Pow wondered briefly, but that was a mystery she'd have to solve later. If she got out of here in one piece, she jumped back just in time to see Ondina coming up behind her. Her normally pale cheeks flushed, her dark eyebrows drawn in an angry expression. Pow had seen more than one in her own reflection. Give it up, Santiago, said Ondina, her voice disturbingly low and calm. You did your best, but your best isn't as good as mine, and it never, ever will be. Behind the glass that had almost electrocuted Pow, something hissed. All around her, void creatures were coming up to the slats in their cell doors, sniffing, beginning to growl and screech as they smelled a living human in their midst. Ondina walked slowly toward Pow, her hands extended like she had won a contest and was approaching to accept her prize. It's time to come with me now, Ondina said in an eerie, flat voice. That's when Pow realized what was going on. Ondina was trying not to upset her. She had certainly never cared about upsetting Pow before. In fact, she'd seemed to relish it. So what was different? Pow looked at the ground below her feet as Ondina advanced with careful steps. Of course, Pow thought. They'd never been in a life force draining palace before. Pow's eyes snapped to Ondina's, which were wide and cautious. The other girl didn't want the glass to bleed Pow dry. But why? Right now, that didn't matter. Ondina couldn't risk moving quickly. She couldn't anger Pow too much, and that gave Pow just the advantage she needed. She reversed directions abruptly and charged full tilt at Ondina. The girl threw up her hands in surprise as Pow crashed into her, gripping her cold shoulders and pushing her back. The monsters went wild, the corridor filling with the sounds of their frenzy. In the commotion, Pow heard a whine that stopped her in her tracks. Sure enough, in the cage, just behind Ondina, was a familiar little face, his green eyes round as coins instead of narrowed in anger and fear. When he saw Pow, he yelped with joy. Bruto! Pow cried, and her own joy gave her strength to counteract Ondina's lunge. Pow pushed Ondina back right up the door, then rammed her into it as hard as she could. But Ondina apparently wasn't susceptible to shocks. Instead, her body killed the current, and the door opened wide as Pow, armed with surprising results of her most recent experiment, changed her strategy. Bruto rushed out and tried to jump on Pow, but he only succeeded in scratching Ondina's legs. The other girl's hands were still locked on Pau's shoulders, pushing back with all her strength, but her collision with the door seemed to have weakened her. Good boy, Pao said, steering Ondina toward the next cell. I'm not a hotel key card, Ondina growled, resisting harder, digging with her fingernails in a way Pao was sure would leave marks. Just when it seemed like Ondina would finally gain control, the two of them connected with the next slotted door. The three skeletal bird people from the stairs stepped out as it opened, stretching their necks and wings. Up close, without the drain of the stairs making her hazy, Pao could see that the bird people were female. Their leathery skin was gray and sagging, their faces cruel with razor-sharp beaks. Lechuzas, shape-shifting witches. The drawings Pao had seen in her mom's books hadn't done them a bit of justice. They were terrifying, much more so than the chupacabras or manos pachanos, maybe even more than the ahogados. One of them let out an ear-splitting screech, summoning from the cell a cloud of bats that attacked the girls with abandon, not caring who they scratched or bit or beat with their wings. Pao screamed and let go of Ondina to cover her head with her hands. Stop this at once! Ondina shouted, waving her hands at the birdwomen as though she could open a door in the air and send them through it. But whatever authority she'd once had over the creatures seemed to have evaporated after their who knows how long stay in the electric cells. One took flight and circled overhead in the cavernous space, while the other two just stood there, watching and cackling, waiting for their turn to strike. Pao pressed herself against the wall opposite the cells as Bruto leaped into the air, biting at the bats whenever they got too close. Pao knew she had to get out of here while Ondina was distracted. Take the stairs, find Dante, but she couldn't leave without her demon puppy, not when they had only just been reunited. Bruto, Pao called, remembering with dread their training work and his limited talent for it. This time he looked up at the sound of his name, cocking his head, and she could have sworn his big green eyes darted to the pocket where she kept her starburst. Ondina was still warding off about 10 murderous bats with her arms, squealing as they twisted her hair into tangle on top of her head, but Pao knew she wouldn't be waylaid for long. Time slowed as Pao locked eyes with her puppy. Bruto, come! She said firmly, loud enough that he could hear her over all the squeaking, shrieking commotion. His head tilted again, and a wayward but talent caught his ear. Come, Pao said in the same tone, though she wanted to scream it in panic. Although another bat dive bombed her, and she barely missed being cuffed with a wing that looked big enough to break her neck. But then a miracle happened, a real honest-to-God, clouds parting, rainbows arching miracle. Bruto came. He trotted across the glass, his nails tapping on the surface as if for a rich lady's parquet floor. She wanted to shout, good boy, until she was blue in the face, but all the reputable dog training sites said to wait until they'd actually accomplished the task. Even if there were a swarm of bloodthirsty bats and 3 bird women ready to strip the meat from your bones, well, she assumed they would have said that anyway. She waited, and her proud little puppy broke into a run, not stopping despite a billion distractions until he was right in front of her. With a smile that looked much too smirk-like to be on the face of a dog, he plopped down on his haunches right at her feet. Good boy, Pao shouted at the top of her lungs, startling several of the bats. She gave herself a moment of peace as she patted his head with one hand and dug around in her pocket with the other for the very last yellow starburst in the magical underworld. She tossed it to him, testing her luck, and because this was still a miracle, he caught it neatly in his mouth. Now let's go, she said, running toward the stairs. Bruto followed behind, barking and snapping at the bats that chased them. Ondina was still preoccupied with the bird women by the deactivated cell door. The 4th floor was so close. No! Ondina shrieked from behind them. You idiots! They're getting away! And then, not the hair! Pao laughed, and Bruto let out a happy puppy yip, like she was throwing a frisbee for him at the park. When we get out of here, buddy, she said as he took the stairs 2 at a time beside her, I'm definitely going to show you a park, and a frisbee, and all kinds of other awesome dog stuff. If she made it back from this alive, her mom could hardly refuse her the void beast that had gotten her through the rift. Could she? The 4th floor came into view, the glass walls darker up there like the tinted windows of the cars that drove through Pao's neighborhood at night. The temperature was lower and Pao felt the drain pulling at her again, harder than ever before, like her energy was a milkshake someone was trying to get the last slurp of. We need to find Dante, Pau said, the words visible as puffs of air in the cold, but it couldn't have been clearer. Dante wasn't on the floor. No one was. The glass was dark and ominous. The back of Pau's neck tingled. Bruto whined, and for the first time since they'd entered the palace, he sounded afraid. It's okay, she said. She tried to say, we'll go back. This was the wrong way. But when she looked behind her, the floor was uninterrupted, dark glass. The stairs were gone. That's when the screaming started. It was soft at first, but it built on itself, echoing around the now sealed chamber like a hurricane wind picking up. As the sound slid up the octaves into a desperate wail, Bruto yelped and pawed at his ears. Pau covered her own with her hands, but it did little to muffle the screeching, which continued to increase in volume until Pau was sure she'd lose her mind. But then, just as abruptly as it had started, it stopped, and the momentary silence was somehow worse. Don't think this has anything to do with your resourcefulness, said a woman's voice, as layered and echoing and terrible as the wailing had been, though Pau saw no one else in the room. It's all because of her failure. A dark demon rose from the floor, Ondina writhing in its center. The crystal turned to liquid that splashed across the floor, disgorging Ondina and soaking Pau's sneakers. I'm sorry. Ondina was on her hands and knees, sobbing and coughing. Sorry won't save you, the voice echoed in Pau's skull. Only I can do that. I'll be back for you, for both of you. After that, the voice stopped, the silence left behind broken only by Ondina's sniffling. Meanwhile, Pau's whole body had gone cold. If the owner of the voice could reduce Ondina to this, what chance did Pau have of getting out of here? Much less of finding Dante and Emma. Franco had been right. There was a source in the rift. Someone who can intimidate and control the void's most fearsome creatures. But who was it? It had been so hypothetical before, an interesting puzzle. But now Pau had the horrible feeling she'd just been trapped in a glass cage by the very general the Niños had been looking for, and she didn't have the first idea how to get out. That's the end of chapter